Good morning and welcome to our talk with the title Coordinated Minds and Bodies, Second-Person Accounts of the Co-Creation of Social Reality Through Non-Verbal Behaviour. Our speaker this morning is Gary Bente, who is Professor of Social Psychology and Media Psychology at the University of Cologne. He is co-author of the German textbook on media psychology and currently editor-in-chief of the Journal of Media Psychology. His research focuses on non-verbal behaviour and person perception in face-to-face as well as mediated social encounters. He's particularly interested in the way human beings establish interpersonal relations and social order and how they coordinate intentions and actions by means of non-verbal communication. A particular emphasis of his work is put on conditions of diversity as defined by gender, culture and communication pathologies. He is also known for his contributions to the development of research methodology, utilizing novel techniques for motion capture and 3D character animation for the study of non-verbal interaction processes. His recent research is applying these methodologies to the study of universals and cultural specificities in the production and reception of non-verbal behavior. This approach for the first time allows the systematic separation of effects of visual identity from the mere impact of non-verbal behaviour. Would you please join me in welcoming Professor Gary Bente.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for doing it again, Sam, or playing it again, Sam. Actually, I'm afraid I will not do it again, just again, because as the Buddhists say, you never can step into the same river twice, because the river is flowing, and you are changing, and I changed a lot during those days, actually, already. So I definitely try to give a wrap-up of these things I was telling the first day, and not to go too deeply into it, but more focusing on the examples and maybe on some of the results that might be at least surprising, maybe sometimes even frustrating, because they turn my world around to some degree. So actually, maybe you remember this picture of what I said is a challenge of analyzing the second-person perspective, and I had the honor and the pleasure to work with Leo Schilbach and also as well already on the paper at BBS on second-person perspective, and I was the one torturing all the other authors by asking to the last moment, what do you think second-person perspective actually is? Is it an epistemological access to people interacting, the way we look at it, or is it the perspective the people are taking, we are looking at? So actually we didn't really resolve this problem, but I think it's worthwhile talking about, because actually if you write an article, you write, we do that, so we as persons try to understand others. What do we mean by we? Do we include the researcher? This is a general term describing humans. If it includes the researcher, we should just skip the old methodology and go for participating observation, because we have to be involved to get the truth out of it. So actually, this is not the way we do it, and therefore, because we are somehow experimental psychologists and neuroscientists, so we try somehow to separate the various aspects of it and then maybe rejoin it into a bigger picture. So actually this picture here is somehow representing what we thought, okay, second-person perspective at least is about a full-fledged interaction between people, being engaged in interaction, being constituting and maintaining relations, trying, sometimes only trying hard, but failing also to understand each other, but at least to find a way to make them believe, vice versa, that they have the same reality and they share the same reality. Sometimes they do, sometimes they just, it's enough to think so and say, okay, now I agree. So it's not about the truth I'm talking between persons, it's about their reality, which might be very different from what might be truth. So if you have the third-person perspective then coming in, I would say that's a good access. Actually, the researcher anyway is in the third-person perspective. He's looking from here on the process. So whatever we do, either we measure the thoughts and beliefs, have they kind of agreement how to describe what's going on? Do they use the same terms? Do they say, okay, if I see another person, if I see you, I like you or I don't like you, I think you are too dominant, I feel too submissive. So is this a shared reality on the conceptual level? Are the brains in resonance? Are they connected and doing the same good vibes, bad vibes? Yeah? And last but not least, what is happening in the observable world of other behavior, and particularly in non-verbal behavior, about which I know this is a very important constituent of interpersonal relations. So actually, the third person is standing here, and why not use then third person perspectives in research consequently by asking other people, what do you see in this interaction? We establish an interaction, we have somebody out there, he's our measurement instrument, if you wish, much better than a computer sometimes, because he has got the touch and feel, the human touch and feel, to see things in that, and he can evaluate as well, or she, yeah, what's going on as the persons in the situation. In the end, the question will be, do they agree, this third person, and the people involved? Do the people involved agree more than the third person? What would be naively maybe the first hypothesis? You will be frustrated about the results, okay? Are we going to see that? So that's the picture, and I'm more in this middle stream, how this interactive behavior is interfaced, is interconnected, intertwined, what kind of causalities happen there, and so on. And my topic is nonverbal behavior. Nonverbal behavior actually serves in different layers. It serves establishing, maintaining, and running, let's say, interpersonal relations. And these are just rough classifications, and you know the psychologists always cut things apart, and maybe I'm a real P counter, but in the end I'm not interested in the number of P's, I'm interested in the bigger picture, so trust me, I try to put it together in some way. So actually, but these are slices and functional levels of what nonverbal behavior serves for, and I just go through it rapidly because I did it already, maybe this was easy to get. Is detection, so if you want to build up relations, if you want to go into the second person perspective, we do it with another conspecific. Maybe sometimes we do it with our dogs, yeah. You can think about whether this is already something pathological. No, I don't think so, but it's not at the core. So it's about detecting a potential partner for second person perspective. So, and this means detecting intentionality, and we do it sometimes from the corner of the eyes. Nonverbal behavior, very important. It says social Second, if we see a social entity, yeah, is this worthwhile or appropriate for a second person encounter, for a second person endeavor? So we have to evaluate. Are they on the same level? Can they do things? Do they want to do things? Do we like them somehow? How is our principal evaluation, and how do they relate to us competence-wise, dominance-wise, and so on? I said there are two components we are going to analyze there. This is evaluation, liking, likability, and the other is dominance. This is constructing the social hierarchy, because person to person, also you might say on a more value level, this is always implying mutual respect and all these kinds of things. The second person perspectives or relations also imply hierarchies, social structures that the one might suffer from, and if he just idealizes second person perspective by saying, okay, this is only available if this is really eye to eye, respect is complete, unconditional regard, yeah, then we lose 90% of social interactions and we are completely lost. So actually, that's the point I want to make. So I'm not pessimistic about human relations, I have to tell you. I might be a little bit more realistic than just saying, okay, this is a true core of the second person perspective, here they join in. Wonderful, we all feel when this is the case, and this is our highlight of the day or of the year. All right, third point, coordination. All right, yeah, if it is a partner, potential partner, so we join in to shared activities, and we have to coordinate our motor behavior, very basically doing things together. But now you say, okay, I don't do so often things together. We're sitting together, we're chatting, and even if I think about what we talked about, I think, oh yeah, it was a nice talk, maybe even interesting, but sometimes it was just exchanging some words. And Marshall McLuhan said, sometimes we're doing noise together, we do something together, all the time, even talking. We do conversation together, and in this conversational setup, even if it's on a party, we have this non-verbal dance together, which gives us a kind of glimpse of a potential coordinativeness with we and the other. So it's always a test bed for how good can we go together, which is again reflected on the side of the conceptual liking and hierarchies and so on. So that's the approach, roughly, which I would start from. So, these were the examples. Now I can show you the old hide and symbol video. It will take some seconds to load. That we are on the side of detecting attentional others. It even goes further. We are prone to really attribute intentionality whenever something happens in our environment which is looking completely unhuman, but is showing a kind of unphysically explainable behavior. You know, if you look at this, you know, and people say, now please describe that. I would say there's a square, there's a line, and there are two triangles, and there is a circle or a ball, and they are moving. But everybody asked, is that okay? there is a chasing triangle, and there's one running away, and there's another clever one hiding behind, and he's trying to detract. So we are using terms, mentalistic terms, to describe triangles. So what's going on in our brain then? Okay, there is a kind of proneness somehow to do so. And I think you can understand what I mean if you see this video. You know, you see the nice little story. Maybe at the end it's boring, but nevertheless, yeah, we do that. So these were experiments we did on that to filter out some basic parameters in these kind of automatisms that cause this kind of humanness or mind processing attitudes with these balls. Again, these balls were just moving through the picture, and then they were stopping, approaching. Maybe you can show one. Very simple things. So we stopped, approached, went on, and in the other cases they just passed each other, and there were certain delays, short delays in stopping, plus approach, short delays without approach. And we just had the impression that there is no physical barrier, and something stops and approaches something else. This is approach. So we constitute this kind of fiction of the second person perspective in this what we observe. So they are related. So what? Yeah. And then we asked how do these parameters influence our description? And we could see in the first experiment that if this delay in stopping is here between 0 and 500 milliseconds, there's a big bifurcation just going to the side of the more personal impression, and then we went deeper into this resolution. We see it's about 150, 200 milliseconds, which is the critical time slot where we start to do this. I always say I don't know, but my explanation is that if there is a critical time slot, 200 milliseconds, this is somehow intuitively the time gap we need, or we assume that the objects need to make up the intention in the mind. So intention needs time, and whenever there's a time gap that is unexplained, we say, okay, there's something happened inside. We didn't see outside, but it needs time. So actually time is a very important parameter. Another example that this can very much depend, and this I want to tell you, it's not just a straightforward one-dimensional perspective on the second person perspective. There are many, many elements that cause this kind of attributions. And some of the elements are somehow coded in time, some are coded in contingencies. So this is a nice experiment of Uli Pfeiffer we published last year. You know, you can be in a cooperative condition, you can be in a competitive condition, and you can be in a neutral condition when you meet somebody and you say, okay, what is this guy about? Would you work with me and collaborate or not? So we constructed something that is called the nonverbal Turing test. So you know the Turing test, where you assume that there is a machine in another room and the machine is communicating verbally, and then you have to say at which point, yeah, this can be human. Yeah, we did the same with nonverbal behavior and just restricting it to one aspect of nonverbal behavior, eye gaze. Again, eye gaze, always eye gaze. So we have two conditions. The other, you are looking at the crosshair, yeah, and the other, the agent, in this case, is following your gaze in this direction in 1 of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6, 4 of 6, 5 of 6, 6 of 6 cases, always or let's say never. And in the other case, he can also look in the other direction. So he's looking in the other direction, always 5, 4, 3, 6, and so on. So this means you have a different kind of likelihood of coincidence, let's say, laws of coincidence of the both cases, and you have this nice experience that somebody is looking in the same direction. Two different things. One is the, let's say, likelihood connection that this particular thing will happen, a specific response will come, either in their direction or in the other direction, and the other is this nice feeling he's following me or she's following me. We know that this, the following, the joint gaze, really fires our ventral striatum, which is a part of the reward system or reward participation system, better to say. And now you see here that we do nice things on this. We operate on that in very, very specific ways. So if you have a naive confederate, you want your striatum to fire only if this he or her always looks in the same direction. So the more contingency this particular person, potential person, shows in the direction of your gaze, the more you think this is a human. There's somebody following me, there's somebody joining in, there's somebody trying to co-construct a reality, to have a second person perspective. Whatsoever we say, this is a mind processing, Turing test passed. Linear trend. If you know already that this is a cooperative partner, You don't have to make your mind up whether this is a guy feeling good with you or bad. Yeah? It's just about arranging joint reality, which means contingency. So it goes up when there is zero response in the same direction and all the responses going to the other direction, and there is humanist description if all responses going in the same direction. It doesn't matter in this case so much whether it's the same direction. It matters that we co-construct a game that is absolutely predictable. Yeah? And if this prediction is all right, you say, okay, this is a cooperative partner. He just did like this, you know, he made his choice, but now he's really consistent in his response. So in partnerships, very often we respond complementarily, not always symmetrically, so this can co-construct a predictable system as well. It reduces uncertainty, and reduction of uncertainty makes your triad happy as well. Then you can also look into depths, and I pass this because within these cooperative conditions you also find two types of people. So again, there's another difference with regard to personality. There are people who go more for the linear positive reinforcement, let's say, and others who are just relying on the contingency. And you might not be surprised that the autistic people go very much for the contingency and less for the positive reward in the same direction. Then we have these examples with movement coordination, and I talked about it already, and I think I can go over it and come to those coordination of facial activity, where you see that only in social conditions, if there is an emotional stimulus, people show the same pattern to get involved in the same experience. And even we could show that just observing this kind of coordinated behavior, non-verbal coordination behavior, creates a cooperative attitude in humans, which leads to, let me see now, I can show you at least one of those. Let me see. There's not much happening, they were just talking to each other, they were perceived as more cooperative, not much activity. These two were perceived in a pre-study as more, let's say, competitive, and you know, closed body posture, and people very much agreed that the one is more to the cooperative, the other more to the competitive side. This is not highly dynamic, you will see much more dynamic ones later. Then they were asked to spend some money in the dictators game, and no wonder the cooperative prime worked as we expected. Expression formation, impression formation was the third point, the middle point, making our mind up what the other is about, and you have seen that nonverbal behavior in very subtle variations comes about to influence our impression of good or bad, sympathetic, warm, cold, and all these kinds of things. So again, this is a basis. Now, we started with a proof of concept to make it clear that this nonverbal system, it is not written down in a dictionary, and there are no fixed symbols. There are different systems just co-varying, some are replacing each other. This was a proof of concept study where we started. I can show you, these are already some more lively animations. You see, this is the animations we get out of our coding programs. Very realistically, well, these people had to get to know each other, and we had this kind of video stimuli, and we had this kind of computer stimuli. Again, now we are at a third-person perspective, analytical-wise, and we are looking at second-person perspectives in dynamic interactions and try to find out whether this changes reality. Do we need the full-fledged channel, non-verbal channels be available for this impression? Do we? What happens if something's missing? For example, the facial expressions are not available in our computer, in our avatars, computer models. So what do you think? What happens? What happens if these most important facial expressions are gone? Are our impressions different? Don't they occur at all? Do we say, okay, I cannot see anything? Or what do we do? Just one question. Just give me a guess.
I think most get sensitive towards non-facial, non-verbal stimuli.
You're right. And this is what happens. We just made this kind of eye tracking there, how people observe these patterns, and you see that they just, the face is still a very important, the head movement is still very important parameter, and so the gaze follows this typical rectangle from hands and face. But you see on the right side here, you see that this was the distribution of gaze to head hand. This big circle is head, the small circle is hand. And this is a equal distribution in the avatar condition where the face was no longer available. So this changes, the attention goes to the hands. But second question was, does this change your impression? You could say, now, okay, they look somewhere else, they get a different impression. So what do you think?
That's the way you pose the question, I'm inclined to say. It doesn't change.
All right, thank you. That's true. You have here this profile, as I said earlier. You see that the three conditions, video and the two avatar conditions, are generating the same impression profiles on these various items. We are closely identical. So, you know, the face is gone, you take the body is gone, you take the telephone, and you got the voice. And the voice is gone, and you try to even extract it from text, which is more difficult. Yeah.
Different groups, of course, so they didn't see first the movies with faces.
Different, independent groups. Was a between subject design, so that's for sure you may not see it before, definitely, yeah. All right, then the question came up for us, so how much are these reading outs of social structures on one hand, of evaluation on the other hand, how much are they really based on universal principles of perception and person perception, or on cultural specificities? Because we know that a nice quote of Anderson, because we are usually not aware of our own nonverbal behavior, it becomes extremely difficult to identify and master the nonverbal behavior of another culture. This is quite evident, and we feel it when we travel always. Yeah? Even if you learn the language and you come there, sometimes it's much more difficult to tune in the rhythm of interpersonal behavior than really speaking the language. And even the intonation structure is something very crucial in getting attached in another culture. So in France, for example, you might like 90% of the words. If you don't like the accent, then everything's okay. And you have the melody that's perfect, and you tune in. Yeah, and in other cultures, it's more about knowing the words. All right, that was the point. And what we did is we made recordings of second-person perspective interactions, which we triggered by specific role plays in 3 countries: US, the Arab Emirates, and Germany. And we asked the people, okay, yeah, you are students of managerial, of economy, and this is a managerial task you have to take, and it's very important. It's a diagnostic for being a good boss, and also for being an acceptable employee, and you get some instructions. So the employee gets instructions. You have been late recently very often, but you are the boss hardly can fire you making good business for the company. The boss was told you have to do some disciplinary action, you have to take it because this guy is unreliable, but hardly you can fire him. So this was a kind of conflict that is really bringing the people into a strange situation. Different types of power, competence on one hand, the status power on the other hand, and now they are trying to negotiate what's coming out. And all right, we filmed that, and we used our high-resolution coding strategies using computer animation programs already during the coding to take picture by picture from the video into the computer animation, which is a real exhausting task, but nevertheless generating a lot of nice data. And then we are producing these kinds of animations looking like that. Again, one of those not happening too much, but you will see that the people are not sitting anymore, they are doing much more. So you see all these kinds of turning and twisting and moving forward and backwards. Say, so what? This is just noise. Probably not. I said we also have to look at the conceptual level. So we have this nonverbal behavior now. It's frozen in our, not frozen, it's animated in our movies, our little code snippets. And then we look at the let's say, the basic structure of describing what's going on. And I said we have 2 dimensions. One is this dominance dimension, the vertical dimension, who's up, who's down, and the other, the horizontal dimension, whom am I liking and whom not. And we did this kind of a real nice confirmatory factor analysis to see whether these 2 dimensions really pertain in the judgments of different people from different cultures. Are these basic conceptual patterns to describe social interactions we look at? And indeed, we could confirm for all cultures what we call cultural invariants for these 2 constructs, these hidden constructs, evaluation and dominance, including always these kinds of factors, items here with a high reliability. So we could use those. Then we looked at the let's say, convergence of judgments, and already I said these were the judgments, the intercorrelation showing that with regard to dominance, all three cultures really converge in their impression of who's dominant and who's not. Even if these cultures had different ways to express dominance, you could see the expression of dominance in the other culture also, it was done differently, implemented differently. They could see it and they converged extremely nicely. And maybe you know the paper of Elfenbein and Ambadi. They also looked at the brains while showing dominance and submission gestures, and this is a nice result because if Japanese are looking at a dominance gesture, as a submission gesture, and Americans look at a dominance gesture, they show the same activity in the reward center. So one is this kind of control by active controlling, being dominant and self-assured and self-ascertaining, and the other is showing adaptation by adapting to the system, so showing this kind of more shy submissive gestures. But completely different patterns doing the same resonance in the brain. Interesting enough, yeah. It's not always just symmetry, symmetry, symmetry. No, it can be complementary here and symmetry here and other way around. So just to make you careful about all the things you are told about the brain activity, we are not there yet. And I tell you, we are analyzing still the brains in isolation and not in combination. We're having people in combination acting, but the brains are still isolated. There are studies from Montague. They are trying not to connect two scanners and so on. A long way to go. In the evaluation part, it's different. You see that the correlations go a little down, and in particular the US and UAE correlations go down. But what is really nice in this, which shows now how these concepts of interpersonality, of second-person perspective with regard to horizontal and vertical dimensions are implemented culturally. And also we use the same concepts to describe the conceptual integration of these concepts is completely different. So if you talk about second-person perspective, this can mean, you somehow understand and you co-arrange, but the inner world that reflects what's going on can be completely different still. And now you can be normative and say that this is not second-person perspective. I would say it starts from there where people get into an arrangement and they get along somehow. I have to think about that there is something like that. And it doesn't mean harmony, in the contrary, not at all. And so you see that the US has a positive correlation between dominance and evaluation. Though there is a liking of being assertive. Interesting. The Arabs, the other way around, there is a non-liking of being assertive. You know, if you have the power, you don't show it. You don't have to. Because the power difference, distance, is so big that you are not supposed to really say, okay, I'm the boss. You know, if you do this, people are laughing at you. So, all right, that's the case. And in Germany, it's just uncorrelated. Say, yeah, okay, you can be dominant and sympathetic, and you can be submissive and sympathetic, and the other way around. Completely different implementations of the concept. So, this was the second level of analysis, and we were completely done after that. We said, okay, now we know the concepts seem to be similar, but the implementation is different. Looking at the nonverbal behavior, you could find very much of agreement which nonverbal cues in this data protocols just determined by regression analysis these kinds of judgments, and you see that there must be much more disparate picture in the evaluation. So we have this kind of inbuilt automatisms, universalities in detecting nonverbal cues of dominance. We don't have, this is more the appropriate level that is causing the evaluation, and this is very differently implemented. Now, individualism and collectivism. We have now dominance and liking, but now also on the other hand, we have this cultural value implementation. So culture tells you something about how to relate to others, and when, and how often, and how to set priorities for not relating and relating. And this is somehow captured by this term individualism, collectivism, or as Kitayama says, interdependent, independent, self-construed. So am I part anyway of the collective? Always in the we mode, let's say, then I don't even need the second person perspective in particular. I'm in this mode all the time, Or am I more in the individualistic mode and I join into group activities for a certain reason? All right. So again, we look for transcultural universality of our concepts. We could find a nice approach. We also saw that individualism didn't discriminate the judgments from the different cultures regarding the different behaviors from the different cultures. Didn't really differ in the individualism aspect. All the cultures see kinds of individualism in the activity. So you are a person, yeah? And even if you are somehow prone to be in the second person perspective, still you are a person. So they make the same judgments on that. But here, in the collectivism, how much you do active efforts to be in this collective sharing in the second person perspective, if you wish. This is clearly culturally differentiated, and they agree that US is the least collectivistic behavior from non-verbal behavior. They extract values. You know, you could say, okay, I cannot do that. You see a video of this wooden puppets moving, and then you ask, okay, is this an individualistic or a collectivistic person? You would say, I cannot say that, I cannot say that behavior. But people do the judgments, highly reliable, and even they discriminate cultures as predicted by Hofstede. This is the lowest level for US, the highest level for the Arabs, and Germany is just in between. Interesting, just was an explorative question, but then we could find it out. Now, looking at the convergence of the judgments, again, we find high intercorrelations. Here is one drop between Germany and UAE concerning the collectivism, which is close to significance, but it is not, we have to say. So overall, there is also a convergence pattern. So again, mostly regarding the individualistic part. So we see this is a person, we can focus on the person, and we say, okay, this is this kind of dominant individualistic stuff. If you go for the collectivism, there might be different parameters that are relevant to see that. Again, if you look at the implementation of collectivism, individualism, these are basic concepts of cultural values and self-control. Then you see for the US, and in particular for Germany, they are negatively correlated. For a German, you cannot be individualistic and collectivistic at the same time. So you have to make your mind up, well, either or, which brings you in a completely different situation than an Arab, who says, and if you ask Arabs, they tell you, yes, we somehow values the family and collective and all these things, yeah. But I'm an individual, so this has nothing to do with each other. It's negative, not negatively correlated, it's not correlated. You can be this and that, and you can implement in the situation of a person as an individual, definitely, but overall the value is somehow brightly shining. All right. Again, we looked at some of the parameters that might explain these kinds of judgments, and most important was here one of those parameters we somehow talked about during those days as well. We looked at, in particular, at movement activity, like complexity of movement, magnitude of movements, overall time spent in motion, all these things. And you see that a large activity, you have to be calm to be judged collectivistic. You shouldn't put too much energy and dominant behavior into the interaction. But what is really nice is that in all cultures, what we call modal mimicry, similarity in body postures and changes of body postures have a strong influence on our saying of collectivity. So you can imagine if there would be a spaceship from Mars landing, and these guys don't look like us, but have some limbs and so on. So the first thing probably you would do, you would start to imitate some kinds of movement or expansions on the body, because you have no idea otherwise how to connect. So you use basic mathematical principles of similarity, but what can you do else? So actually it's a very, very deeply rooted pattern to really join systems, social systems. Okay, now you can then look at dominance and evaluation and collectivism together, and I will skip that. You will see that, for example, for individual collectivism here we have the negative correlations. Let's go back to UAE. You have here between evaluation, which is important, and the dominance, you have a negative correlation, and in, okay, the US was done already. You have a positive correlation, as I said before, and individualism, collectivism, this negative correlation overall shows the implementation of these four patterns. Actually, just saying that the concepts appear to be similar, but they are differently implemented. Now, cross-cultural comparisons of self and other perceptions. Now, you could say, all right, you had this third-person perspective on second-person, on people in second-person perspectives in interactions. So this was our definition in the BBS paper as well. This is engaged in people, and they are observing, measuring people engaged in second-person perspectives, but sometimes we do it from a third-person perspective on our own as a researcher, in this case, from the observer side. So what happens now? This is one of the more lively animations. The people are not sitting, they are moving towards each other, they are keeping distances, they are really putting in movement efforts. These are the kind of animations we used recently. And they are not coded, they are just picked up by means of motion capture technologies. And so these people, again, had this role play, and who's the boss actually? On the left side? Right, yeah. Very calm, this person. On the other hand, yeah, you feel he's a little bit uncertain what to do because this conflict, if he's getting too sharp, this guy will step out and he lose his best salesperson. So actually, right. So these were the inputs for the judgment studies. And we again looked at the factor structure and we found this likability factor and the dominance factor. I can tell you this is now over and out. We can use this instrument. It's cross-culturally valid. But now I was shocked. These are the ratings, the judgments of the people involved in the second person perspective interaction. And they had to tell, how did you feel about yourself? Have you been dominant or have you been nice? Or how friendly do you think you have been? And then they talk about their partner. How friendly has their partner been? And we were assuming that this true core of personality theory is true, saying, okay, if they are in a second person perspective, their impressions converge. They are not correlated at all. And I have just to tell you that, it's just coming up recently, and I was completely shocked. But this goes apart. They have a completely different vision of the world, but nevertheless, they get along to reach some goal together. And you maybe remember this strange theory, ethnomethodology of Garfinkel, who says this is not about truth, it's even not about reality, it's about co-inventing some kind of illusion. You go for it, and as long as you are in a balance, everything is fine. Yeah, it sounds really weird and brutal somehow. Yeah, but maybe it's a way to look at things. Yeah, sometimes relieving us from all the normative aspects at first, and then come back and implement the norms. Because actually, I think just superimposing that there would be norms in behind that co-create this evaluation is not true. Yeah.
I don't quite understand. So you ask the people to behave in certain ways, and afterwards ask them how they feel.
Yes, as you do in everyday life, you have an interaction. They interact, then the interaction stopped, and they are set apart, and they answer some questions how they feel. And then they said, okay, now given this interaction you just had, we want to have your opinion. What do you think how you came across? Yeah? What do you think how you were in this situation? Just make a mark between 1 and 7. Friendly, nice, warm, dominant, strong, weak, all these kinds of things. And then we construct this, use these items to combine them to the factors, dominance and evaluation, because there are items loading on these factors, which means they correlate strongly with one another. And then we use the factors as derived items, because it's much simpler. You don't want to have 20 t-tests or ANOVAs, because we have alpha errors, so you use the two. And then you correlate these between, this is a balance I attribute to myself. Myself have I being sympathetic and friendly and so on. And this is the balance, the other attributes. And this value is the Pearson correlation. This goes from -1 to +1. And +1 is significant and -1 is significant. And maybe giving this small sample, yet you would expect here at least a 0.6 or 0.7 to really go over the threshold. This is far from any significance, and I think I can get another 20 or 40. It will not get more significant. I will do so, but actually it was the first thing we have to deal with. All right. Shocked, I leave it as it is. Yeah.
Because the subjects, experimental subjects, need more interaction to realize or to notice which is their own role. Or to
yes, but how would you explain then that third-party observers, not even involved, also only watching 3 minutes of this interaction, over all cultures converge this extremely in their judgments? There must be something in the behavioral data that is able to make these judgments converge, the judgments of the observer. But they don't. So I have no idea. There must be something different. They are involved. So the second person perspective is just bringing you in deep trouble sometimes. This is also what I wanted to say. And I think sometimes it would be better to step back and see what kind of game is running, even in negotiation situations, than to keep inside and just try to produce and reproduce your inner reality because maybe it's not in harmony. So it's kind of a problem, yeah? Even if you have to interact for 5-10 minutes, you can say, okay, let it go. After that, you don't meet the guys again. That's part of the problem. But if you have to have a longer relationship, yeah, you have to overcome this first contact or conceptual problems as well. Yeah.
What I was wondering is, suppose those two people interacting know each other well. Does that make a difference? Because I can imagine that the fact I have a mental picture of myself and I want to...
Indeed. There are other studies just talking about this two-core of personality theory, where they ask, they give personality questionnaires to people. They say, you judge yourself, not on these dimensions, but more on the big 5 dimensions personality questionnaires. And then they gave it to other people more acquainted or not acquainted with them, and hopefully they'll come back. Yeah. And then you see that there is a convergence. So they say, all right, if the better you know, the better is the convergence.
Because there's a higher need to stick to reality, whereas if it's someone you hardly know, you might be trying to show yourself in a positive light because you're not interested.
Could be. I have no data to contradict that, but I at least would give another option of thinking about it. Overall, over a certain time, you have to co-construct a certain way you agree upon describing one another as well. And this is, the concepts get habituated as well. And whether you are in everyday life still in harmony with whether you are friendly, feeling you are friendly and the other is not, you are not so consciously reflecting on that all the time, and I think there are huge discrepancies even in partnerships and marriages.
And in that sense, stepping out of yourself and taking the third person perspective is kind of quality control of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I would say.
Could be, yeah. Actually, I think that the going out of the situation is only necessary when there is a break in efficiency or a break in good feelings. You know, you go on. I think people tend to go on. Yeah, and they are not willing just to change because they see that there could be sometimes a change for better. Most of the people, actually. I don't want to touch on you. But actually, this means that you perpetuate patterns, conceptual patterns, behavioral patterns, but there might be conflict situations. And in these conflict situations, you try the old strategies to work on the conflict. And this is bad, because they only work when there is no conflict, because it doesn't matter. But if you try to push this, like, neurotics would push his strategy to get others controlled, yeah? And then you're getting into trouble. And on the end, yeah, this is the only way to step out. And I think two people in a direct interaction have a hard time stepping out, so they need mediation and all these kinds of things. You need somebody maybe to make some games to get you in this meta perspective. It's hard, because if you decide, maybe your husband or I decide, my wife would say, yeah, now you want to make a nice move, huh, to get me in the corner. Yeah? I said, no, I just want to step out. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, you know all these kinds of games, you cannot get out of the game. So really getting in the third person perspective doesn't mean that you say, okay, now we see us from the outside. You cannot, just automatically. All right. Yeah.
Or you can leave the second person. Oh.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We could discuss which would be the outcome of such a strategy. Yeah.
So your point is that the second person perspective is deeply biased?
Absolutely.
Many biases?
Absolutely. There is a normative aspect in it, and I heard this in the discussions always. It's a kind of, wonderful paradise of interpersonal being together and connecting. Yeah, oh my goodness. I look at the world and I think, yeah, this is a nice word. I like it, actually. I'm not a pessimist in this case. But sometimes it's not about always looking at these kinds of connectedness and understanding. It's also bearing diversity and dealing with diversity. And this is also a core of this cross-cultural stuff. Yeah, this is accepting diversity, and it's even accepting diversity with regard how I see myself and the other sees me. And this is really tricky to do that. So actually, I would say it's not a big harmony, and we are not losing ourselves in the other. Yeah, we're just connecting in some way, and we have to set up some kinds of rules, and whatever works, yeah, for a certain time, and not producing too much costs is okay. Yeah, but that's a kind of very normative statement, and I don't want to take it as a result of the data. This is just my interpretation. That's it. All right. Again, we looked at the number of behavior, and we could find that, again, this time spent in motions, how active you are, is negatively correlated, and then things like head deviation, you look away from the partner, all these kinds of things we were expecting were occurring. But again, the self-evaluations were completely taking into regard different parameters than the others' evaluations. So the others were looking at the symmetries and at the magnitude of movements. What you see from the outside, and the self was more focused on the motor activity going, what you feel about your body. You don't see yourself, you just feel yourself. So the activity partners shape your impression, and the dyadic, let's say, orientations partners shape the impression of the outside. That's for natural. But if you are exhausted, and you feel you did a lot of things, the other side you underspent activity, that's possible, because the point of reference for judging our activity is different. So again, I would say interesting.
And if you would show someone a film of how he was doing, does that change? If you force someone physically to look from the outside?
We didn't do that yet. It's a good idea, actually. There are some studies on self-judgment, seeing their own movies, and it changes impression. But you know yourself, sometimes seeing our own movies, our own pictures is not always nice. How strange did I behave? And this kind of, so this discrepancy comes up even if you do a single person trial. So I think you're right, change it. But this doesn't move anymore now. I don't know. All right. Okay. What was then interesting, we looked at the cultures again, and just wanted to see whether our methodology works. And we have some just nice exemplary differences in the expansivity and proxemics between German and Arabs. As you know, there is this Edward T. Hall stuff on proxemics, how close we get. And sometimes people say this is not true, and this is a large variation. But what you see here, this is the interpersonal distance of these two actors in Germany. And this is the interpersonal distance. Actually, it's in pixels, but you can recalculate it. This is about 70 centimeters if you recalculate it in centimeters. And this is about, excuse me. This is about 140 centimeters. This is about 110. So these are 30 centimeters difference. So if they are in conflict, the Arabs, they go to arm lengths even. Stop just before. The Germans stay out of the range where you can get hit. So it's kind of a strange arrangement. And the same is true with expansivity, how much you take then the room. This is much more for the Germans. They expand their upper extremities a lot, and the Arabs keep it on their own. So very interesting how they arrange the space. They come closer with the bodies, but this implies also that you are not this expansive with the arms, because this is offensive immediately. Very, very physical things actually, but you make a social meaning out of it if you are involved in this interaction, and you're going out from it as I felt strange, but you don't know why. So this was Edward T. Hall described. All right, maybe a last example, and then we are done. This was another study where we had actors play affects. So there are affects that are socially very relevant. These affects that call out for approach, which means happiness and friendliness, and I feel good. And the other is like anger, don't come closer, and I'll hit you. And we had several actors playing that. We had a lot of samples of that. We selected 40 scenes, 20 of anger, 20 of happiness. And there is this old theory that diversity on the conceptual level and also belonging to different groups will create different ways to approach in a second person perspective. So if you have an in-group member, you would probably look for possibilities to coordinate and to combine. Whether, on the other hand, if you meet an out-group member, you would be more alarmed about possible risks of contact. So this was a basic statement, which is somehow easy to understand. We thought we could check that. So again, let's see whether we can. These were the avatars we used. We created, let's say, an in-group, out-group avatar and vice versa, showing this to Arabs, both of them with both kinds of affects, and the other way around. So European, Arab, and we looked at the typicality. This was okay here, a little bit flat, but significances were sufficient to say this is a typical European, this is a typical Arab, but you see already that they have also different lookalikes, and we have to look at this later. So these are the animations. So what was anger, what was happiness? You would say, before I started this is easy to see. I tell you, it is not. That's the first point. I was really surprised when I looked at it. My guys came and said, okay, we have the samples ready. I said, look at it. I want to sort out the best happiness and the best anger things. I said, okay, what is happiness? What is anger? So there was just a huge movement activity, and I couldn't discriminate. That's okay, all right. Maybe still people are able to discriminate if we show it to a lot of other people. Maybe I'm dumb and stupid in this respect. So we showed it, and to participants in both countries. And then we had these recognition rates of happiness and anger. So first of all, what you see, the green one is the anger. So in both cultures, and this is already established in neuroscience, that these negative effects are not easier, they are faster recognized. Because it's much more important to avoid the risk than to take a chance. You know, the rabbit, one chance to get out of the way of the fox. Yeah? The fox, many chances to get another rabbit. So that's for sure that you have to see where the danger comes from. And that's a simple thing. And then you see a little bit happiness and overall a little bit deeper. And then we had the cultures of the Arab avatar, the European, and we had the Arab raiders, observers. And what you see here, they exactly show these patterns. If they see in the Arab, yeah, they were going up with the recognition rates of the positive emotion, going down with the recognition rates of the negative emotion. So this was exactly what we wanted. But the German raiders did the same, and we were expecting it's just the other way around, because in-group, out-group is a different reference. So what is happening there? Are the Germans, are they crazy, or what's going on? Now, this is a kind of result I just want to tell you, because sometimes research is not just confirming your hypotheses, which is boring anyway, but it's just putting you in a new situation where you have to ask new questions. And we were really asking, we did this on certainty of judgment, and we did this on reaction times, which is extremely hard data. So how fast are you detecting? Pushing the button. And everything is systematically in this way. So there's no way to get out of this problem. And so we asked, and I told my people, okay, maybe I didn't see the avatars, but there must be something in the appearance of the avatars that already primes the perception of the nonverbal behavior, which is somehow, you know, we were working on nonverbal behavior, and now come on, I go a step back and say, okay, if this guy comes along in the first milliseconds, I make up my mind whether this is a nice guy or he's happy or not, and then just like he can do whatever he wants, yeah, it just blocks my brain and primes me to go into a certain direction. Very interesting. Because if you come with even with a pre-attitude towards somebody, or with his first impression, then this guy is really eager to show you his friendliness, yeah? But you already are trying to see the negative side, so come on, what happens? And that's really a problem, an issue. And that's exactly what is true. We did this study in checking whether these different avatars differ in their evaluation by others and their emotional expression perceived on the static picture, and you could see these highly significant differences here, culture of avatar, showing that this difference occurred already. All right, I think I can leave it here because actually this is just a starting point to see maybe we sometimes make a wrong focus, and we should even look at these first instances of visual contact, but not only into that, but also in the first instances of knowing something about another person. Because actually often when we meet a person, we are not a tabula rasa, we already heard about. We have hearsay, pre-information. We have all kinds of snippets of information that set up our brain in a certain way. And now you could say, yes, but now this person comes in and I see he or she is very sympathetic and I make up my own mind. No. Because our brain is in a certain mindset, just processing the data in a different way. It's not a voluntary decision, yeah, you make up. Like in the stereotype threat aspects, you know. You can try hardly, and it's the only thing, the best you can do. But nevertheless, implicitly, even unconsciously, these kinds of setups make me worry a little, and they are really causes for some of the problems probably we have in that area. So actually, I close with that. Thank you very much.
one question.
Yeah.
You're looking at, have you started to look at three-dimensional movement of your avatars in space? Because it's proximity as well.
Yeah.
So if you're coming towards somebody, you could be coming towards somebody to hit them or to shake their hand and congratulate them.
Yeah.
So have you started to put those sorts
No, we do that in
calculations?
virtual reality when you were yourself involved, so
Yeah.
the subjects were in this kind of Googles and you
Yeah.
are really in 3D space
Yeah.
where you feel the distance, and that's exactly what you have. There's somebody approaching with a certain speed. Speed is the first step.
Yeah.
How fast? Collision is prepared.
Yeah.
And now, what kinds of valence signals does a colliding object carry? So if you move fast with a smile, and you wouldn't step back. If you move fast with a frown, you would step back. So you have a vector, this is just approach vector, and now you have to decide, stay there in contact, collide, or run away. And this is just additional signals carrying a plus or a minus, or very primitive things actually we act upon. And if you know somebody